Alrighty, YouTube Niner Empire, what is going down? Welcome back to another video here. So Steve Wilks today completed both interviews with the LA Chargers and the Atlanta Falcons for their head coaching role. Obviously, with Steve Wilks, like Adam Peters, he's going to be heavily pursued by other teams to be their head coach. He definitely could have got the job last year in Carolina, but obviously they decided to go with Frank Reich instead, and obviously that kind of blew up in their face. But with Steve Wilks, the players love him. He's had a great year with the Niners. He started off, slower, had to get acclimated to the defense, and he turned things around following that bye week we had. And again, I mean, he had one stint as a head coach in 2018 with the Arizona Cardinals that obviously didn't go too well. It was a one-and-done type of year for him, but at the end of the day, I think he's proved enough going back to defensive coordinator that he deserves another opportunity as a head coach. It's interesting that the Chargers and the Falcons really have only been the only two teams to reach out to Steve Wilks about interviewing him. I expect him to be gone, to be completely honest, like Adam Peters. I just think, again, there's so many openings, there's so many options, and if Steve Wilks interviews well, I don't see why any team out there would not take him as their next head coach. So, obviously, you'd hate to see a guy like Steve Wilks go, but I think we can fill that role like we typically do every year we filled it with Saleh leaving, we filled that with D'Amico coming in, and then D'Amico leaves for the Texans. By the way, shout out to D'Amico Ryans. Got his first playoff win today as a head coach and has done a phenomenal job with the Houston Texans. Without a doubt would get my vote for coach of the year. But it's interesting, and this kind of coincides with what I'm going to say, but it's interesting because the Atlanta Falcons are a team that could probably use an offensive-minded guy to be their next head coach, somebody that can work with a young quarterback that they're probably going to have next year. And I think with the offensive weapons they currently got over there, hiring an offensive-minded head coach would probably be the move if I'm Atlanta. But at the end of the day, D'Amico is a testament to that really doesn't matter. As long as, like D'Amico, defensive-minded head coach, but he went out of his way. He, lured Bobby Slowick from the Niners to go be his offensive coordinator, and they are wreaking havoc. They blew out the Browns today. And not even today, but they've had a tremendous year all season. Bobby Slowick has obviously worked tremendous with C.J. Stroud this year. But, yeah, I mean, I definitely think, should Houston hire a head coach? Probably, or an offensive-minded guy? Probably. But, again, Steve Wilks could go there, set that culture, set the tone, and then hire a great offensive staff, and, they could be back in business. So, obviously, Atlanta's got a lot of question marks. Who's going to be their quarterback, this and that. But I definitely think Steve Wilks is deserving of a head coaching role somewhere. And, again, there's plenty of teams out there. I know New England just hired Gerard Mayo the other day, but there's plenty of teams out there that need head coaches. And, again, there's many options for him. I would expect more teams to reach out to D'Amico Ryans. Obviously, we'll see what happens. But, so Steve Wilks, again, I expect him to leave, but he completed both interviews today with the Atlanta Falcons and the LA Chargers. Again, he's going to be pursued probably heavily. I'm not going to lie, I don't like when assistant coaches for the Niners, though, interview when we're about to go into the playoffs. It almost seems like their head is completely on that, but the only reason I'm not too, mad about it or anything like that is because we are on a bye week, so I understand, we obviously don't even know who we're going to play yet, so they're probably not preparing to. I mean, obviously they're prepared and they've been healing up and they are preparing for this next game, but in terms of we don't even really know who we're going to play yet, so, I get why he takes these interviews during the bye week. But no, yeah, again, Steve Wilks, he's going to be pursued. Again, I wouldn't expect these two teams, the Chargers and the Raiders, to only be the two teams to reach out. But he completed both today, so obviously We'll eventually know more soon on how well those went. But again, I definitely think he's pursuing a head coaching role. I think he probably looked at the 49ers and thought, the last two defensive coordinators they've had have went on to become head coaches. I think he also wanted to prove, along with what he did in Carolina last year, which, again, he should have very well been their head coach, but I think he wanted to prove, like, hey, I can work with, a bunch of teams in this league, a bunch of defenses in this league. I can work in all types of different schemes. And even when he talked earlier this year about the 49ers defensive scheme, it was something that he wasn't used to, but he adapted to what the 49ers defense knows best, with the 4-3 stuff. So, again, I mean, I think he probably, like Steve Wilks even mentioned that, he looked at that as a challenge to kind of adjust to something that he wasn't too familiar with. So he stepped out of his comfort zone, and he did an amazing job with the Niners defense this year. But we'll see what happens, of course, with Steve Wilks moving forward. We'll see what other teams reach out to him as well. What are we looking at here? The Titans, the Raiders still haven't hired a head coach, but I expect them to hire Antonio Pierce. The Chargers need a head coach. Let's see. And there's plenty of teams, of course. Commanders, obviously. So, again, and obviously watch for the Commanders as well, because you look at Adam Peters getting that job. Steve Wilks worked with Adam Peters this year. Maybe Adam Peters decides to pull Steve Wilks away from the Niners and take him with him to the Commanders. That could be interesting as well. I think it's a little different with Steve Wilks and Adam Peters, though, just because they were only with each other for a year, and I don't think they know each other that well. But if Adam Peters thinks Steve Wilks did a good enough job, obviously he's going to interview him, and obviously that would probably be another team that I would definitely expect to reach out to Steve Wilks. Like the Falcons, though, man, I would expect the Commanders to probably reach out to more offensive-minded head coach and probably pursue offensive-minded head coaches opposed to defensive-minded head coaches. But again, as long as Steve Wilks could build a great offensive staff, behind him and with him, there's no doubt in my mind that he would do just fine as a head coach if he's able to get a second shot. But a lot of jobs out there for Steve Wilks to fill. Something that's also going to be interesting too, and I believe I mentioned this in my other video, talking about Steve Wilks. The Panthers last year with Steve Wilks, they were obviously in a situation where they didn't have enough, but Carolina needs a head coach now. Steve Wilks should have gotten the job again. He was kind of snubbed with that. They went with Frank Reich, and Frank Reich didn't even finish out the entire season. But so Steve Wilks kind of gets snubbed from that job, but the Panthers now need another head coach, obviously, firing Frank Reich. I wonder if the Panthers would reach out to Steve Wilks again and request to interview him. And honestly, if I'm Steve Wilks, I'm probably declining that interview just because they passed on me last year, just to kind of be petty, because who really wants to go to a situation like that where the ownership's terrible? Their owner, David Tepper's an idiot, especially after seeing him throw that drink at the fans. But if I'm Steve Wilks, I'm without a doubt thinking, like, no, I'm not doing that. Like, screw that. You guys didn't take me last year, and now you want to, try to get me this year. I would definitely decline that interview. And again, it's just a complete shit situation in Carolina. They're just not, Bryce Young. They don't have a lot of people. They're going to be a pretty bad and poverty team for probably the next 2 to 3 years. They're just going to have to draft well. They got to get their front office right first before anything. But it would be interesting to see if Steve Wilks would go back to Carolina. I do know one thing. He loved Carolina. He loved the players. The players loved him. And I could see that being kind of a thing that I guess could go into a reasoning why he would go back. But again, I wouldn't expect him to, without a doubt. I think he takes a job elsewhere in a better situation. And if not, he'll likely return to the Niners. I can definitely say without a doubt I wouldn't think Kyle Shanahan has a problem with that. I probably think he prefers that. But Steve Wilks eventually is going to be gone. So obviously we'll see what happens down the road. But yeah, he finished the interview with the Chargers and the Falcons today. So we'll see how that goes, especially throughout the remaining of the playoffs and going into the offseason, or the remainder of the playoffs going into the offseason. So let me know what you guys think of this, of course. Let me know if you guys think the Chargers or the Falcons will hire him. I definitely could see it again. He's super talented defensive guy, and he's done enough, in the years that he hasn't been a head coach to prove that he gets another shot. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, Steve Wilks potentially could be a candidate, or I guess is a candidate right now for the Atlanta Falcons and the LA Chargers. I'll continue to keep you guys updated on the situation. As always, go Niners, and I'll see you guys in the next one.